The metallic groan of shifting bulkheads echoed through the command chamber, each sound punctuated by the heavy footsteps of armored guards dragging their prize forward. The alien generals watched in a semicircle, their different forms silhouetted against the harsh, sterile lights. To them, this moment was a celebration, a human finally brought low, humiliated before the architects of his species' defeat. The prisoner stumbled as he was thrown to his knees, a hood masking his features. His uniform was torn and stained with soot, though the insignia over his chest, a simple silver raven, remained stubbornly intact. He was silent, his hands bound in thick restraints that glowed faintly with suppressive energy. High, General Quarth of the Vrex Dominion loomed above him, mandibles twitching in visible disdain. His scales shimmered a sickly green under the lights as he circled the kneeling figure, tapping a sharpened claw against his own chest plate in a mocking rhythm. "So this," Quarth sneered, voice wet and rasping, "is the apex of human resistance? A feeble thing, cowed and silent." Several of the other generals chuckled, their voices a cacophony of hissing, clicking, and guttural rumbling. An insectoid admiral with jewel-like eyes clicked her mandibles in amusement, while a rotund being wreathed in methane vapor emitted a low, gurgling laugh. This one was found in the rubble of their last holdout, another general, Zake of the Veil Unity, added, his elongated head tilted in curiosity. No weapons, no allies, no fight left. Quarth leaned in close, his breath stinking of ozone and blood. "Tell me, human, were you their leader? Their last hope?" The prisoner gave no response. His head remained bowed, motionless save for the slow, steady rise and fall of his chest. Annoyed, Quarth struck him across the face with the back of his clawed hand. The impact echoed through the chamber like a gunshot, but the prisoner only shifted slightly, his body absorbing the blow without so much as a flinch. "You will answer," Quarth snarled, "or you will suffer." Still, the prisoner was silent. A younger officer, emboldened by the general's amusement, stepped forward and delivered a brutal kick to the prisoner's ribs. This time, the human doubled over slightly but made no sound. The officer sneered and was about to strike again when Quarth held up a hand, stopping him. "No, not yet," Quarth said. His predatory smile revealed rows of needle-like teeth. "First, we show him the futility of resistance." He turned to the gathered leaders, sweeping one hand dramatically toward a towering holoscreen that flickered to life along the far wall. Grainy images filled the display, Earth's major cities burning under orbital bombardment, humanity's last fleets shattered in orbit, refugee convoys being ruthlessly dismantled. Scenes of despair, defeat, and annihilation. "This," Quarth said, his voice thick with triumph, "is all that remains of your world." Several generals clapped their claws or appendages together in approval. They whispered predictions of Earth's final capitulation, of the spoils soon to be divided among them. One of the insectoid admirals leaned toward another and muttered, "Perhaps we will keep him alive for sport." Their resilience is entertaining. As they mocked and schemed, none of them noticed the subtle twitch of the prisoner's fingers, the barely perceptible straightening of his spine. Only one, an older, battle-scarred tactician with sunken eyes and heavy breathing apparatus, seemed uneasy, glancing once at the prisoner and then away, as though some instinct gnawed at the back of his mind. Without warning, the chamber's lights flickered. For a split second, the room was plunged into darkness. When the lights surged back, the prisoner remained kneeling, but something had shifted. An invisible tension now crackled in the air, subtle but undeniable. Quarth, oblivious or uncaring, raised his voice. "You have one chance, human. Speak your codes. Tell us your remaining defenses. Do so, and we may yet allow some of your people to live, as laborers perhaps. Pets." The prisoner lifted his head slightly, the movement slow and deliberate. Though the hood still concealed his face, the generals could now see the edges of a scarred jawline, lips pressed into a thin, unyielding line. He inhaled, the sound of it cutting sharply through the room's artificial silence. Then, softly enough that it might have been mistaken for a breath, he spoke. "Knew you would come." The words were barely audible, but they dropped into the room like stones into still water. The general stiffened, exchanging confused glances. Before anyone could demand clarification, the overhead alarms blared, a piercing, shrill warning not heard aboard the dreadnought in decades. Intruder alert. Systems breach. Code black, asterisk asterisk. Chaos erupted. Holographic displays distorted and collapsed into streams of corrupted data. Doors slammed shut across the ship, locking the generals inside. Environmental controls shuddered, vents belching freezing air into the chamber. Kvarth whirled toward the prisoner, his earlier arrogance evaporating. "What have you done?" he bellowed. The hooded figure rose to his feet with an unsettling calmness. The restraints binding his wrists deactivated with a mechanical hiss, falling away to clatter against the floor. He reached up and pulled back the hood. The human's face was a battlefield of old scars and fresh bruises, but his eyes cold, focused, merciless, burned with a ferocity that rooted the aliens in place. A small, grim smile played across his lips. "Call sign Raven," he said, voice steady now, acknowledged. As if answering his words, deep within the ship's core, something vast and violent began to stir. And for the first time that night, the mighty alien generals knew fear. The silence after Raven's declaration lasted only a heartbeat before it shattered under the wail of klaxons and the shuddering of the dreadnought's massive frame. The floor beneath them lurched as internal systems began shutting down in cascading failures. The chamber's towering doors, designed to withstand plasma bombardments, sealed themselves with a bone-jarring clang, locking the generals inside with the human they had so recently mocked. Kvarth bellowed for security, for containment measures, but the comms crackled with static, then fell silent. Around him, the other generals barked in their native tongues, their voices layering into a cacophony of panic. None of them noticed Raven move. So slight was the shift of his weight, so fluid the way his hand found the small device embedded in his wrist cuff. A pulse rippled through the room. The bindings still littering the floor twitched once, then vaporized into nothingness, leaving only wisps of charred air. From hidden seams in Raven's clothing, thin lines of carbon fiber armor unfurled across his body, wrapping him in a sleek, matte black exosuit. It was primitive by alien standards. No shimmering energy fields, no heavy metallic plates, but there was a lethal efficiency to it, a predatory design honed for close-quarters devastation. Kvarth, still reeling from the betrayal of his own systems, pointed a clawed finger at Raven and roared, "Kill him." The younger officer who had kicked Raven earlier rushed forward, sidearm drawn, but he was dead before he completed the first step. Raven moved with unnatural speed, slipping inside the alien's guard and snapping his neck in a single fluid motion. The body collapsed, twitching spasmodically, as Raven turned to face the others. For the first time in living memory, the assembled warlords hesitated. Throughout the ship, deeper alarms now joined the cacophony. Distant explosions rumbled through the decks. Emergency lighting bathed the chamber in a blood-red hue, throwing jagged shadows across the floor. In the brief, flickering moments of normal illumination, the generals glimpsed the streams of data pouring across Raven's visor, system schematics, enemy movements, timing calculations, updating with relentless precision. Zake, gathering his courage, snarled something guttural and lunged, a serrated blade flashing from the folds of his robe. Raven sidestepped him almost lazily and drove an elbow into Zake's temple, dropping him with a sickening thud. Another general, the insectoid admiral, tried to summon a defensive shield, but her device fizzled and died under the ongoing electronic assault. Raven's hacks ran deep, corrupting not only physical systems, but neural links and psychic relays. Their technological superiority was now a cage closing around them. A muted vibration tickled the soles of Raven's boots, a signal. Somewhere in the black void beyond the ship, Allied forces had received his confirmation. Reinforcements were inbound. He needed only to keep the generals here long enough. Kvarth, realizing brute force had failed, tried another tactic. He spread his clawed hands in what might have been a gesture of peace, though the tremor in his arms betrayed him. "You are alone," Kvarth rasped. "A single human against the might of the Dominion. You cannot win. Surrender, and we will be merciful." Raven tilted his head slightly, considering him. A smile ghosted across his lips, not of amusement, but of cold, professional calculation. "I'm not here to win," he said quietly. "I'm here to break you." Another tremor rocked the ship, this one heavier, deeper. Raven could almost hear the distant roar of hull plating rupturing as sabotage teams tore through vital systems. The dreadnought was dying piece by piece, and the generals knew it. Panic began to fracture their unity, each looking for an escape route that no longer existed. One of the methane-wreathed creatures began hammering on the sealed doors with heavy fists, its booming demands swallowed by the ship's wailing alarms. Another tried to activate a personal teleportation device, only to scream as the faulty mechanism flash-fried his internal organs. There would be no escape. Raven's infiltration team had ensured that before he ever stepped aboard. Still, time was a luxury he could not afford to waste. Reinforcements were coming, but so too would retaliation once the enemy command structure reasserted itself. He needed a decisive strike. Moving through the generals with predatory grace, Raven planted compact explosives at key junctions. Life support relays, command uplinks, localized gravity stabilizers. Each charge was no larger than a coin, barely noticeable against the sleek metal walls. But the damage they would unleash would be catastrophic. Kvarth watched him, seething, but he did not move. His pride anchored him, as much a weakness as any physical chain. "You think this will matter?" Kvarth spat. "You think your little rebellion can halt what is already inevitable?" Raven paused, the final charge cradled in his palm. He turned toward Kvarth fully, meeting the alien's burning, hate-filled eyes with an icy calm. "Rebellion." Raven echoed. "No, this is reclamation." He pressed the charge to the wall with a magnetic snap and activated the timer. Another explosion shuddered the floor beneath them, closer this time. A low groan rippled through the ship's structure as internal bulkheads gave way. Oxygen began to hiss from ruptured conduits. Temperature gauges plummeted. From the wreckage of the communications panel, a garbled voice broke through. Human, triumphant, defiant. "Raven Actual, we're locked on. Breach teams in 30 seconds. Get ready." Raven allowed himself a small nod. The first phase was complete. He turned away from Kvarth, moving with methodical purpose toward the chamber's secondary exit, a maintenance shaft too small for the bloated generals to pursue him through. His voice, when he spoke again, was almost lost beneath the rising storm of alarms and failing systems. "See you at the tribunal." Then he was gone, swallowed by the narrowing darkness, leaving the alien high command trapped, disarmed, and for the first time, truly aware of the retribution barreling toward them. The last thing they heard before the maintenance hatch sealed was a whisper, distorted but unmistakable, bleeding through the compromised speakers of their dying ship. Raven Actual, objective in motion. The maintenance shaft was a throat of darkness, lined with a labyrinth of exposed cables and humming conduits. Raven moved through it with the silent assurance of a predator, his armor's servos muted to a whisper. He didn't waste time savoring the disarray behind him. There was still work to be done, and his extraction would only matter if he completed the real objective, the decapitation of enemy command and the neutralization of their war engine. He emerged into a narrow service corridor, the walls slick with condensation from ruptured cooling systems. Emergency lighting strobed irregularly, throwing his elongated shadow across the floor in jerky, broken images. The floor trembled beneath his boots as distant impacts rattled the dreadnought spine. Somewhere above him, boarding parties were carving their way into the ship's vulnerable hull, sowing further chaos. A pair of alien soldiers rounded a nearby corner, their armor bulkier than the ceremonial dress of the generals. These were frontline enforcers, built for endurance and shock assault. They hesitated at the sight of Raven, perhaps mistaking him for a downed crew member. He offered them no time for correction. A flick of his wrist deployed a short combat knife, monomolecular at the edge, and in 2 efficient strides he closed the gap. The first soldier went down before he could raise his weapon, Raven's blade slipping through the joint of his armor with surgical precision. The second fired a plasma bolt, But Raven ducked under the crackling shot, seized the weapon's barrel, and wrenched it aside with a brutal twist. The alien's own finger triggered the blast as Raven forced the muzzle upward, burning a molten hole through its helmet. Both bodies hit the deck almost simultaneously. He scavenged a keycard from the first corpse and slotted it into the corridor's security panel. The door ahead stuttered open, granting him access to the deeper systems, the heart of the ship, where he could inflict maximum damage. The closer he moved toward the ship's primary core, the thicker the resistance became. Small units converged on his location, but Raven was already 2 steps ahead. His visor projected real-time tactical overlays, enemy positions, patrol routes, environmental hazards, and he wove through them with lethal elegance. Where fighting could not be avoided, he turned every advantage against his foes, using narrow spaces to negate their numbers, blind corners to nullify their ranged superiority. He picked up a compact plasma rifle from one fallen foe, calibrating it on the fly for human ergonomics. The weapon was crude compared to Earth's newer rail-based models, but its devastating firepower would be sufficient for what he intended. Explosions rattled the ship more frequently now. The structural integrity fields were failing, causing entire sections to decompress into space. Over the comms, Raven caught glimpses of his team's progress. Secondary reactors sabotaged, navigational arrays offline, command pathways severed. The dreadnought was dying by 1,000 cuts, and its death throes would cripple the Dominion's offensive capabilities for months, perhaps years. Still, the generals remained alive, for now. Trapped, humiliated, but breathing. Raven's mission demanded more than mere inconvenience. As he neared the core chamber, a low growl rolled through the passage ahead, vibrating the very air. Raven slowed, scanning with enhanced optics. Something larger than standard soldiers was blocking the path, and it wasn't retreating under pressure like the others. From the darkness stepped a creature nearly twice Raven's height, encased in heavy armor that pulsed with internal energy fields. It bore a massive warhammer, its head crackling with kinetic charge, and its 4 eyes burned with a cold, merciless intelligence. A High Marshal, personal guard of the Dominion's upper echelon. Raven exhaled once, steadying his heartbeat. He adjusted his grip on the plasma rifle, then tossed it aside. Energy weapons would barely dent armor like that. This would be a fight of precision, not firepower. The High Marshal charged, each footfall sending tremors through the deck plating. Raven waited until the last possible moment, then rolled to the side, feeling the brush of displaced air as the hammer smashed into the floor where he had stood, tearing a crater in the metal. Before the Marshal could recover, Raven was on him, striking at the gaps in the armor with his blade. Sparks flew where the monomolecular edge bit into joint servos, but the alien retaliated with brutal swipes, forcing Raven into a defensive dance. It became a deadly rhythm, the Marshal's overwhelming strength against Raven's relentless speed. Twice the hammer missed by inches, cratering walls and collapsing support struts. Each time, Raven countered with precise, surgically placed attacks, slowing the alien down, bleeding it. The final opportunity came when a missed swing overextended the Marshal's arm, exposing the sensitive underplate near the armpit. Raven surged forward, driving the knife deep into the creature's flesh. With a roar of rage and agony, the High Marshal staggered, swinging wildly. Raven ducked beneath the desperate blow and seized the alien's own warhammer. The kinetic coils were unstable from repeated impacts, and Raven made no effort to control them. He activated the hammer at maximum output and slammed it into the alien's chest plate. The impact hurled the Marshal backward in a limp sprawl, armor cracked, and internal organs liquefied from the force. Breathing heavily, Raven discarded the hammer and continued forward. The core chamber loomed ahead, a cathedral of energy, the ship's pulsing heart exposed within a containment lattice. He worked quickly, planting the final charges at the central regulators. Without them, the core would overload catastrophically, taking the entire dreadnought with it. A soft ping in his ear confirmed the external breaching teams had almost reached him. Extraction was imminent. He just had to survive a few minutes longer. As he set the last charge, he allowed himself a moment to glance upward. Through the lattice's shimmering shield, he could see the stars, cold, distant, and vast. A reminder of why he fought. A reminder of what was at stake. He keyed the detonators, setting them on a delay. 10 minutes, just enough. Raven turned from the core and sprinted toward the rally point, the ship groaning and fracturing around him like a wounded Leviathan. Behind him, in the collapsing heart of the Dominion's greatest weapon, the seeds of retribution had been sown. And humanity, so long underestimated, was just getting started. The corridor twisted and bucked beneath Raven's boots as the dreadnought's death throes intensified. Bulkheads groaned like wounded beasts, walls split, venting gouts of steam and occasional sprays of sparks. Emergency klaxons had shifted from a shrill warning to a constant drowning wail, as if the ship itself were screaming. Through the haze, Raven spotted the breaching point, a ragged tear in the hull where human strike teams had punched through. Figures in matte gray exo-armor waved him forward, weapons sweeping the area for hostiles. He recognized the lead operator by the blue stripes slashed across her chest plate. Lieutenant Marrow, one of the few who had survived the early Dominion campaigns. Raven tapped his wrist, transmitting the final signal. The charges he had set would detonate soon, but first they had to be clear of the blast radius. Status. Marrow barked as he closed the distance. Cores rigged. Generals are trapped in the council chamber. Extraction route. Marrow jerked her thumb over her shoulder. We've got a hole punched straight to the hangar. Raven Actual, your bird's waiting. 5 minutes max before this tub goes critical. No time to waste. Raven nodded once and fell into step beside the squad as they pushed toward the hangar bay. They moved like a single organism, silent, deadly, efficient. Every shot they fired struck true, cutting down panicked Dominion soldiers who barely realized the tide had turned against them. The hangar stretched before them like a yawning cavern, filled with the wreckage of destroyed shuttles and collapsing scaffolds. Above the chaos hovered a human dropship, battered but determined, engines flaring against the growing turbulence. Its loading ramp extended like a beckoning hand. A squadron of Dominion loyalists had established a defensive line between them and escape, their plasma rifles spitting arcs of lethal light. Raven's team returned fire, using fallen debris as cover, methodically dismantling the defender's position. Raven spotted the leader, a battle-hardened officer shouting orders, rallying the crumbling line. Without hesitation, Raven surged forward, weaving through the maelstrom of gunfire. The Dominion officer saw him too late. Raven tackled him behind a smoldering shuttle fragment, silencing his desperate gurgle with a swift strike of his blade. Leaderless, the enemy line faltered. Human forces pressed the advantage, surging toward the dropship. Raven covered the rear, ensuring no last desperate counterattack could undo their victory. They reached the ramp, one by one hurling themselves aboard. Raven lingered a heartbeat longer, scanning the hangar with clinical precision. No pursuers. No survivors. Only the groaning death of a colossus. He turned and sprinted up the ramp. Marrow hammered the hatch control, sealing them inside with a hiss. The dropship's engines roared to full throttle, the vessel hurtling away from the disintegrating dreadnought. Through the rear viewport, Raven watched as the charges detonated. It began with a pinprick flash at the ship's center, a tiny wound blooming into a radiant air. Then the core's unstable energies burst outward, ripping the dreadnought apart in a wave of white-hot fire. Sections of the ship peeled away like the petals of a dying flower, venting crew, debris, and plasma into the unforgiving black. The Dominion's pride, its flagship, its symbol of unassailable might, was no more. A collective murmur ran through the human crew. Awe, relief, grim satisfaction. Raven said nothing. He watched until the last fragments of the dreadnought disappeared from view, until even the wreckage was lost against the canvas of stars. Only then did he allow himself a breath. Marrow clapped him on the shoulder, a rare smile tugging at her scarred mouth. Hell of a show, sir. Raven nodded absently. His mind was already shifting ahead, calculating the next moves. The death of the Dominion dreadnought wasn't an end. It was an opening salvo. Others would come. Retaliation would be swift, vicious, and unrelenting. They had bloodied the enemy, but survival would demand more than daring raids and explosions. They would need allies. They would need strategy. They would need hope, weaponized and directed like a blade. The dropship's pilot called out over comms, cutting into Raven's thoughts. Commands hailing us. They want to speak to Raven Actual. Marrow handed him a comms unit, and he accepted it without ceremony. Raven Actual, this is Homefront Control, came the voice, steady, low, familiar. We confirm mission success. Dominion High Command destabilized. Priority targets neutralized. Phase 2 is authorized. Repeat, Phase 2 is authorized. Await further orders. Raven tilted his head back against the cold metal wall of the dropship, eyes half closed, letting the words settle into the battered bones of his body. Phase 2. Reclamation, retaliation, rebirth, whatever history would call it, it was beginning now. Copy, Raven said. His voice was calm, resolute, the voice of a man who had crossed too many thresholds to ever turn back. Standing by. He ended the transmission and set the comm down beside him. The dropship banked, heading toward the cluster of Allied ships gathering in the distance, a ragtag fleet cobbled together from the remnants of shattered worlds, defected colonies, and the stubborn refusal of humanity to accept extinction. The war was far from over. But tonight, among the ashes of their enemies' arrogance, humanity had earned the right to hope. Raven closed his eyes briefly, listening to the low hum of the engines, the steady breathing of the soldiers around him, the distant crackle of stars outside. There would be no peace, not yet. But there would be a reckoning, and he would be its harbinger.